Hi, everyone. Today I have a very special interview that we are doing. Talked about it before, but very excited to have with me today Stone Perales, who was the art director for Chaotic for about the second half through Turn of the Tide through the last set. And Stone, thank you very much for taking the time to join me today. And very excited to talk about art and Chaotic's history. So thank you for being with me.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really glad to get a chance to share, and I feel like there's so much stuff that never got seen, but that was made and made true to the brand that it's a great opportunity to just share and answer questions. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we can just jump straight into it. First thing, kind of want to ask you, and it's a pretty broad question, but if you could just share with us a brief overview of your time at Chaotic. You worked through about 4 sets. Just how did you get involved with Chaotic, and then anything you'd like to share as far as what it was like to develop each set, and yeah, just kind of your overall role during your time there.
Well, my background's in video games, and that's the primary area that I've built most of my career in. But at the time, they were interviewing for art directors in the TC Digital office in the San Diego area. They had another office in New York that was handling a lot of the work. So there was an art director before me who worked with me that was very helpful, named Jason Narvaez. But when they interviewed me, there was a guy named Rob Robbers, and he spent a lot of time looking for someone who would take a lot of care for the brand and that would stay true to the vision that they had for it. And I tried to give him, during my interview, my logic and the way I would problem solve things, and he really liked it, and he was a big part of bringing me aboard. But when I got there, one of the big things that was on the plate for me to help with was that they made a lot of cards, they had a lot of designs, and they needed approvals for the show, and they needed to get things in the show moved into the shelves, like with new sets of cards. And they needed a lot of organizing of the art and also streamlining of stuff. So although they had a clear, distinct style that had been emerging, there were so many people that it was hard to maintain the production with multiple things, merchandise, cards. And so my job initially was to bring some clarity and some order, to bring new process to things, to help streamline things, and then to start to lean into how to elevate and evolve the look of the brand so that things can continue to evolve in the years to come.
Awesome. That's really cool. I know I accidentally skipped over real quick, but if you don't mind backtracking a little bit, I am curious if you can go into a little more detail about your history and just art in general. You said you started doing video games. What was that like, and sort of what initially got you into the field of art directing?
Well, since I was little, I've loved animals and I've loved art, video games, like all these things that I think a lot of kids like. They were just a big part of my life, Star Wars and all the cool stuff that was out there for me when I grew up. And I actually started down the path. My very first job was at a pet store, and it was a really big pet store that was very popular. So we had all kinds of animals from all over. And I worked there many years at multiple pet stores that were part of that chain. And in the process, I moved into the fish department. I worked with insects and arachnids like scorpions and other things, snakes, reptiles. I got to work all the departments and experience a lot of different things. And in my own life as a kid, I would often have animals or catch and relocate them just for keeping them safe as a little kid. And so my early years were formed around a knowledge of biology. And then I tried to become a veterinarian. I was working as a veterinary technician shortly after that. And there came a point where there was an opportunity at a video game company, and I saw a posting at Orange Coast College on the job board, and they gave a list of all kinds of things you need to know, different software packages. Photoshop, 3D Studio Max, at the time, Fractal Design Painter, I think was the formal name of it. They had 7 different programs. I didn't know any of them. I was computer illiterate. And I just thought to myself, this is my chance to kind of change the shape of my life. I've always loved games. I've always loved science fiction and fantasy and cartoons. And at that time, it wasn't easy for me to figure out how to get into any of the things that I loved. But I did love animals. And so I took a chance. I brought a painting and a bunch of drawings from my sketchbook. I went to apply. And in the application process, they kicked me out. They didn't want me applying in person. And I told them, I said, I'm just hand delivering my stuff. And so in my hand delivery of things, the owner of the company walked in. He gave me an interview. He hired me and told me that the basis of his hire was on talent, that I could learn hotkeys, but that having somebody who has a passion and love for art and design was important to him. And he was a Pasadena Art Center graduate. And so that gave me my start. I learned a lot of software packages. I taught myself as an intern, and then I transitioned to working there. And as the years went by, I built momentum in the game space, and I got to work on a lot of cool games. And so when things culminated with me leaving Sony and seeing where some of my friends had ended up, different people ended up at different studios. One of them mentioned TC Digital and that they needed an art director. And so by the time I got to become an art director on Chaotic, I had already experienced all kinds of areas of being educated on and exposed to different productions, different ways of making things, different techniques in art. So I was literate with modern practices. I had a lot of analog skills. And then I had a big base of knowledge in biology. And on TC Digital, it kind of all came together. Chaotic gave me a chance to take what I had studied all those years and put it into the design. I could elevate the design of the Mepidians, of the Danians, and understood what anatomical differences were there, and had a lot of personal life experience with animals, and also with imagining things that didn't exist. And so I feel that Chaotic really brought together a lot of things and gave me an outlet to express my love of design and animals and science fiction and fantasy all in one brand. And so that's it was one of the most special places I've worked at.
That's awesome. That's really cool to hear. Moving on from that into your work within Chaotic, we talked a little bit about it before. I've really valued the conversations we've already had, but I'd love for you to share kind of your specific goal while creating artwork for Chaotic, and if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit how we talked about you really taking pride in every card, even the ones that weren't necessarily the most valuable or powerful. But yeah, just what was your goal while creating artwork there, and just the attention to detail that you poured into every card?
Sure. Well, when I was a little kid, there were a lot of struggles in my life, and there were a lot of things, like many kids, that I wanted but that I couldn't get. And so whenever somebody would give me a toy or something, those early memories of making that toy last, and this is all I got, I've got to make the most of it. There was this sense of whatever I got, it was super valuable to me, and I wasn't going to get many things afterwards. And so those early memories of value and playtime on my things as a little kid at 5, 6, 7 years old carried over into my thinking that Chaotic as a brand of had like a wide range of ages. There were a lot of players that were diehard players, competitive, and they had a lot of fun, but those people, it reasoned, would have younger siblings or even kids that would be attracted because the older kids would be doing something cool. And when I first joined the team, I did an audit on the cards that we had, and I looked at what cards were coming up. And we had a lot of cards that were going to be shards or components of a deck, but the artwork was not very fun. The description was a crystal shard. another crystal shard. Like they had many of them that were like that, and they were necessary for the gameplay design at the time, but they didn't seem to be fun for the artist to work on. And so when I joined the team, the cool characters, the fun stuff, those were dominated by some pretty amazing artists. And I felt that as an art director, my job was there to serve people and also to elevate the brand. And so I combined that personal belief into production by taking the artwork that nobody wanted to do and creating an example that the least important card needs to be justifiable and important, and if it's not, it should be removed from the game. But if it is worth keeping in the game and adding to the canon of art that we had, then let's do it really well. I set the example, and I think my first crystal shard was the one I did with Maxor's hand holding a shard. And I simplified the composition. I made it really nice and focused. And my thinking was, if this is an extra card and it's low value in the deck, and somebody's little brother or sister received it, they could still have the hero character holding the shard. You can't prove it, but it is Maxor's hand. You look closely, you're like, and so I wanted there to be a little hint of a narrative, something for everybody, and a reason why low-level entry into the franchise would still create value and not frustrate a mom who, if she bought a limited number of cards and the extras that you got, you're like, what do I do with these extras? They're worthless. And I think that drives a lot of people nuts when you have a deck with too many extra cards that are just wasting your money and you're looking for the good ones. And somebody ends up with those extras. And so why not make it so that everybody who is touched by the brand has something to walk away from at their age and their participation level? So a connection to the younger audience, bringing them forward to the current audience, and then a vision for the future, and giving an example to the production artists of how to serve the team by taking worthless art and making it worthy art. And in doing that, I gained the respect of all of the other artists, and they started insisting that I get removed from those and take more important cards. And so that's how I transitioned to doing some of the most important cards of the deck.
Really cool to hear. We talked about it a little bit before, but it's really awesome to hear all that from you and be able to talk to you, because just the connection for as long as I've been a fan of Chaotic, it's cool to hear the investment that you put into every individual card, even when it wasn't the most valuable one, because I can relate to that because I was that kid. I can remember the binder I had, and I can remember the cards I had, and they certainly weren't the most rare or the most valuable, but some of them had your name on it on the side as the artist credit, and I remember cherishing those cards very much and falling in love with the artwork and sort of the world that those artworks help build. So it's really awesome to talk to you and to share that.
I can tell you in all honesty, from the bottom of my heart, each card I did with the time that they gave me, the best job that I could do. And I did my best to think of more than just the checklist of my work for the day, but how that card was going to sit in someone's hands, what the viewing distance of the card was, how to make it really cool looking without even knowing the stats, that you would just intuitively look at it and go, I want to keep this card. This is awesome. As a piece of art by itself, it's cool. And then in the gameplay, it would only be even cooler if they gave it better stats. I couldn't control stats and details, but I could control everything else about the visual presentation. And I also noticed that there were very complex compositions with a lot of things, and they looked amazing on a big screen, but when you shrunk them down to a little bitty card, the card just looked confused and muddied, and it was too much going on. So part of making the value of the card art improve was in simplifying the approach to presenting the card, the intended viewing distance. So, but that's my approach. I'm very design centric on everything I do. So I believe strongly in looking at it from other people's opinion, not just my own. I have my own biases and preferences, but I thought, okay, what is somebody who's not into this, what would they think of the cards? And I felt that if I could persuade parents to think these were high value cards, their kids would be able to get more cards. And if I gave them a feeling that the card was valuable to multiple people in their family, not just boys, but to girls, to little boys, to little girls, like to a range of people, that I would be more inclusive and have a connection with a bigger group of people than just for it to be the older boys that would play in a more competitive environment at the time. So inclusion was a big thing for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really cool. And even just speaking on how the cards presented when they were, how the artwork's presented when they're on a smaller card, I can definitely see that sort of thematically, especially in some of the battle gears that you did. Even just speaking on the Vlark shard that you did with Maxor's hand, just the clear attention to detail and work that was poured into that one. Just how it's a closer up image and you're really just getting that focus shot on just the shard. I'm sure it could be easy or exciting to make a wider shot showing more of Maxor or anything like that, but just the lighting and composition for several of the battle gears that you did as sort of more of a tighter shot, I think really pulled you into the world, and I think you definitely had a very unique style that made those battle gears really cool.
Well, whenever I worked on a card, I always asked myself a few simple questions. I would start off, and this is a methodology, a way of looking at things that's useful not just to artists, but to anybody who's trying to think of solving a visual problem. And I would start off by asking, if this were a theatrical performance, if this were a movie, who is the lead actor and who are the supporting actors? And how can I make you remember the star of this card? And so I think a lot of times people get distracted with details and miss the big picture, and they want to put foil and bright colors and more characters, and adding more can sometimes just confuse things. But making sure that if the crystal shard is the star of the card, then it needs to be the number one thing that you connect with. And giving you an emotional bridge to transition to an inanimate object, I felt what would be the most loved character. One of them was Maxor. So putting his hand on it, as I'm walking through those steps in my head, it makes sense that should be hinted at. I don't have to put all of him because the shard is the star. But until I joined the team, it was the other way around. People just made the cool cards the important ones, and nobody really liked or cared to do too much work on these. These were just filler cards that were cranked out really fast. And I don't think it's fair to say that they didn't care. I think that the schedule was demanding and many people just had limited time, so they weren't able to put the time in. But creating value within management for every card enabled me also to give the correct time for certain cards. But also, I did change the process in production, and that might lead into some more questions. But I can tell you in a little bit once you get through more of your questions, how I changed the production of a standard card to make them faster to produce.
Sure. I mean, while we're on the topic, I got time if you want to dive into that a bit.
Sure. I think this is a good one for people who find themselves wanting to do something, but they're not doing it the way everybody else does, and they're struggling, but it's still something they love. I love the idea of working on these cards, but we had artists that were working on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, on other cartoons that were popular at the time. They were the same artists that were in those productions, and they would rotate onto my team and out of my team. So they had really high profile work. They were famous for doing things. And then I was joining them coming from a video game background, and I didn't have as much credibility in the cartoon space. And so I found that I needed a way in. And so at first, the first card they gave me, it was Mapidian. He was in the desert and he was an assassin. And I struggled. It didn't look like any of the cards. My counterpart in New York was coaching me, trying to help me get through it. And the average card, they do a pencil design, they submit it, and if it's approved, they do a thumbnail, a pencil, and then an inked version, and then a colored version, and sometimes post-processing on that. So they were able to compact all of that into 4 days worth of work per card. That was the average. And for me, I'm like, I can't do this. My workflow is different. I come from games. And I kept punishing myself, trying to figure out how I could keep up. And I think 6 or 7 days into one card. And when I was done, I thought it was not that great. It didn't mesh. So I was really discouraged. And I sat and I gave some thought, and I thought, I need wisdom. And I don't know what people believe or don't believe, but I literally just took some time to myself, prayed to God for wisdom, like, hey, I need to figure this out. And I'm very big on ownership, not on superstition, not on, attributing something to something else that doesn't exist, but on like practical hard work. But I do think that setting our mind to trying to sit back and look at ourselves from a different perspective is important. And so I articulate that into just saying, I pray to God for wisdom, but I'm really seeking out solutions in my head. And so I just sat there, cleared my head, took inventory on what I had, and I thought, I'm traditionally trained in oil painting. My approach in oil is very different than my approach that these people have. What could I do? And so I came up with this idea that I would just continue to work on a card until it got approval, but get a whole bunch of cards from the art director separate from that, and work on them all at the same time, start in color, and then turn those in as my thumbnail. But I was turning in artwork that wasn't penciled, wasn't inked, wasn't thumbnailed. My thumbnail was the final art. I would just paint it in one shot in the computer, and I could do that in a day. And I saved about 20 of them. And while they continued to critique my first one, I then flooded them with all those other cards. And when those other ones came in, at that point, I think it really changed the way they looked at the cards. They started seeing a high volume of cards in a really short amount of time. And I told them, I said, let's get through the set. And when we're done, whatever cards are remaining, I'll take those and I'll give them extra time and polish. If you have feedback or critique, save it for the end. And by the time we got to the end of the production, I had about 70 cards, and they just didn't have time to give me those notes. They look great. They look cohesive. They created a unifying look. And the team realized, like, you could have a different style of art and it could still be used effectively with the set. So it was an interesting evolution for me, and I learned how to take my approach that's different and add it to the production. So I was the only one that consistently did a card a day. Everybody else used a pipeline where they alternated between their skill set. So one guy would pencil, a different guy would color. And at that time, we just had a few people. They happened to be guys, but I think there were women that were working on some of the cards overseas on some of the other studios that were helping us. But on my immediate team, it was just Kari Randolph, Jason Narvaez, there was a guy named Etienne. There were a few other people that helped us, but we had a small group of people that would regularly give us cards. And so, I don't know, that might be a long explanation, but that was what was going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's really cool to hear how you try to push them forward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next question I have for you. We talked about it a bit just before we started recording, so I thought it'd be really cool to dive into it, whatever you can share. But as you've shared with me artworks and thought processes that you've had, it sounds like you've when you got on the team, you start to develop a clear mindset for what each tribe should have as far as themes and visual styles. I think it'd be really cool if you could expand on that and how that started to develop. Unfortunately, some of those artworks you were showing me never made it to production, but I could definitely see how things were starting to progress as far as clearly defining the types of artworks and inspirations and again styles that you wanted to use for each individual tribe to give them their unique identity?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that happens on a production when you have a lot of different people working, we had external studios that were working for us in different countries to help us produce the volume of cards that we did, as well as the animated show. And as art would move from a trading card design into the show and the show into merchandise, there were different iterations of characters. And without a consistent hand guiding some of these decisions, there were time constraints where a studio might make a decision because they had 24 hours before they had to put it into the show, and they would turn something around quickly, and they needed approval, and someone didn't approve it at the right time, or there were these problems where art moved and evolved differently in different people's hands for different reasons, and without someone policing it, it fragmented the brand. So the Danians in particular, I found some had 6 legs, some had 8 legs, some were really bulky and bulbous, some were skinny. There was no consistency, and you could see that each one was an interpretation of a different artist. And some of these artists were with the brand for a very short amount of time, and they didn't have time to acclimate and digest and kind of fall in love with the characters and connect with it at a personal level. They were mechanically turning stuff out and going to the next thing. And so when I joined the team as an art director, and also for me that I love design and I love things that look plausible and credible in the real world that are still fantastic, I could see that. It was really apparent to me that if there was an area that I could affect, would be to unify and clarify the process. So I began to write a style guide for the brand and try to define what is a Mepidian, what is a Danian, what is someone from the underworld. Like each category, give some reasons and some logic and some thinking that would make it easy for future artists not to have to rediscover that, but that they could build on that momentum. And a lot of the art that was never printed into cards really was the pieces of a style guide. It was sheets that have an image of a drawing that I'd make and things that I'd show that need to be present and things that should be removed, and just standards to use. And as I implemented those, it helped all the other artists start to unify things. So I think that was a big part of my influence on the Chaotic franchise.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. And like I said, especially seeing some of those unreleased artworks that hopefully I can share, it's been really cool to see how they continue to evolve and become more clearly defined. I think the Danians are a great example that, as nostalgic as it is for me, they felt kind of scattered as far as like not a very strong identity versus, when you look at insects, there's so much variety and such cool designs in real life. I always kind of wish that Danians leaned into that more, and we could see that in those later sets and especially in some of those unreleased artworks. I think it's really cool to see how that was starting to develop even further, which is cool to know. It's kind of bittersweet that it was moving in that direction and we never got to see more. But
yeah, I think the
go
Danians
ahead.
are a really good example of how there were solutions in nature that weren't utilized in our show. Like in a hive of, let's say, bees, there are clearly like separated visual differences between a drone, a queen, a worker bee. Like each one has a purpose, has a look, has a design. And I thought, well, we need to incorporate at least the minimum that nature shows us into us. And then if we make something different, it should be intentional. So I wanted to make sure everything was done with intent, that things didn't happen, but that they were designed and they were made to connect with the game, with the people, with the lore, and with fans, and also to be sustainable to continue to grow for the future. So I think that's the job of design in what we do. You know, design elevates everything. It has a way of making everything have a purpose and a meaning and a place. Like if you have creative expression with no limits, it's pure creativity, it's your expression, there's no right or wrong. But the moment you have constraints, you now have design. If I tell you, I need you to develop a utensil to go camping that is useful like a spoon to drink soup, but that also can poke fruit or meat like a fork. And if you'd never seen a variety of things, you'd be like, well, how do I make that? And somebody years ago made a spork, and it was really popular in Boy Scouts. They would use it at the stores when you'd go camping and pick up camping supplies. And it was just a simple design, but it solved a problem. And I felt that there were a lot of problems to solve in the Chaotic brand with the characters, with the show. And in solving these problems, I think it made it more enjoyable to be part of.
That's really cool to hear. Kind of along with that, it makes me think about the next question here. The part of what made Chaotic very special is the connection that the trading card game and the TV show had, and how both worked together to just build this really magical world that people fell in love with. I'm curious if you can talk a bit about what that connection was like, and did you receive notes from the TV show or people who were sort of writing and building the world as far as what creatures and objects should look like? Or did you ever get to give them feedback as far as some of that different art direction that you wanted to design? And did you ever have an influence on the TV show, vice versa?
Yeah, I think when I first started, the writers had a tremendous influence on the show, and they would cycle through different writers. At one point, I counted 5 different writers that were writing scripts for the show, and each writer had a personality, had an idea, and sometimes they would mention things that were specific and they would require art. Sometimes they would explain a little bit of a description of what it was like, and then we were stuck with having to work with that because it was approved for the show. But a lot of times we could interpret things. And so at the beginning, knowing that they had deadlines, they had a certain number of cards they wanted to release on time, and then I joined them. They didn't have a proper source control or repository of artwork that would be easy for me to access and look what was done and see what needed to be done. It was a little disorienting, and that was what I brought to the team. There was another guy who was a programmer, and his name was Grantley Day, and he was really smart with a lot of little things. And he told me, he says, we could use, I could help you build it's like an internal wiki. I think at the time it was called Daisy, but we just needed to make some kind of internal way to organize things. And so he helped me. I came up with some outlines on how I wanted to store artwork. And I just took the art that we had for the production. I entered it into this, what's equivalent to an internal wiki board, and just started labeling stuff. I went to the customer service team and I just asked everybody, put tag words and take some time each day, and anything you can see that's important, just add it to this. And that was the birth of organizing the whole project, of the cartoon, of a lot of things. And slowly over time, every card that we worked on had an entry, we had an explanation, and it made approvals easier because the whole company could see what we were up to, what was scheduled, what wasn't, and what feedback we had gotten from different people, plainly visible for everybody to see. And during that time, I was able to start adding notes and style guide pieces that problem solve things that the whole team needed to work on. And that was the point when a shift happened where I began to shape the look and feel of the brand. And my goal wasn't to make it in my image. My goal was to make it more, to make it easier for the consumer to relate to, easier for the fans to connect to. So I felt that the spirit of the brand, the original ideas that Martin had, and that a lot of the things that the fans loved and cared about, I wanted to preserve those core things and just make it easier to continue to connect with that. And so I was very careful not to reimagine the whole thing, but simply to imagine it in a way that I thought was better than what it was. So I considered it more like an evolution as opposed to a redesign. But technically, I redesigned quite a few things, but I think when you look at them and look at what was done and where it was heading, it made sense and it felt right. And so I used my gut and feedback from fans and from other people that were internally working there to kind of feel my way through to make sure it still was going in the right direction. You know, you run this risk of playing God with a brand, and whatever you say becomes part of it, but it can really alienate people. And that was what I was trying to avoid.
Right. Well, for me personally, it's really cool to see that as the sets progress, especially through the sets where you came on as the art director, the artworks, the themes seem to get more mature and the styles seem to be a little darker, a little more mature. And we talked a little bit briefly about it. I think it'd be really cool to hear if you can expand upon if there was any intentionality in trying to mature the artwork and continue to push the boundaries to keep the fan base engaged, as many of us, started playing as kids in 2007, but obviously as we continue to get older, there was more than likely an effort to mature with us and to keep us engaged. So yeah, just be curious to hear you talk about that, if there's any efforts to, on your end, keep the artwork pushing the boundaries and continue to mature with the audience.
There is a natural evolution that goes on for many animated shows as well as movies and stories. And a good example of how something can evolve and visually change a lot, but make a lot of sense, I noticed in the old Batman the Animated series from 1992 and 93, that era of time. And when Poison Ivy was first made, she looked like an Amazon. She looked very strong and she looked capable of fighting and doing a lot of throwing things around pretty easily. And slowly, as the season progressed, as the character developed more, they had a clearer idea of how to represent her visually, and they shift her from her original design into something with more pale skin that's more petite. She looks more nymph-like. And that change is a drastic one visually, but it makes a lot of sense with the character and the original design of the character for the show. And it was embraced internally. And there were many characters that were changed in how they were colored, how they were drawn. Poison Ivy's skin tone goes from normal flesh tone to a very pale, lighter skin as that series progressed into, I think, season 3 and 4. So while that evolution was happening, I think it is something that happens on all productions, that when you live with the character for a while, you get to know the character, and then it starts to make more sense what the character would and wouldn't be and wouldn't do. And so I joined midway. A lot of people started giving me that feedback, and then I got to experience connecting with the brand, and I started extrapolating their thoughts and my own and figuring out, like, okay, this makes sense for this character. I think one thing that was affecting the brand that I affected that's unique to me is that my core art style tendencies is realism. And that is heavily grounded in fantasy and science fiction. So when I'm under pressure and I don't have a lot of time, I naturally revert to that because it's what I know that I can do the fastest. And in the process of doing that, my concept art and my notes had more detail than a simplified cartoon, but those details were picked up on by other artists and started to be incorporated in things. And so I think it was kind of a complementary thing that I didn't mean to happen. I wanted the cartoon style to maintain. I just wanted more quality coming out of it. But when you bring different people together, each person brings something to the team, and we all affect each other. So some of it was by design. Some of it was as the brand ages, the characters evolve, and others was subconscious and indirect because of my tendencies in art on how I drew and how I affected other people and inspired them. But overall, I would say it's a natural process that happens on many productions when you have them running for a long time.
Gotcha.
Even like Harry Potter's characters, as they get older, they become more adult and they start dealing with more difficult things. And they may have gone very dark with that franchise, but when they go from being little kids and really adorable into nearly full-grown adults, like even their own bodies are changing. It makes sense with the character's age and where they're at in their journey. And so I think a lot of that happened with Chaotic.
Yeah. Well, it's really cool to hear, and obviously we can sort of see that evolution in the artwork. So to hear you describe it is very cool. Kind of a question that I didn't plan on asking, didn't give you a heads up on this. So whatever you can or can't share, that's totally okay. But just curious what your thoughts are on. Brian Gannon has mentioned that he would like to revive the brand and is working on it, and us fans are kind of patiently waiting on anything official in that regard. Just curious what your thoughts are on for the brand to relaunch the art direction, any sort of, if you had your say, if you were still the art director, how you think they should proceed forward, and what art direction you would recommend they take going forward, whether it's just picking up right where they left off or anything like that. Would just be curious to hear your take on that if the brand relaunches.
Coincidentally, I messaged him today and he's going to call me later. So there's some things that I don't know. And if he's been up to something that he can reignite or launch, that would be awesome. I would love to be a part of it. I think that would be super fun. That being said, the question of how I would approach it if I joined now versus what was done back then, I think with all things that are nostalgic, there is this dilemma that comes up where you run out of things that can truly be nostalgic, and then you're stuck having to make new things. And the new things are often not relatable to a newer generation in the way that the older generation relates. And so I think with a good design, it's like Star Wars as a franchise is probably a good example of this. And these are my own personal opinions. They might be offensive to somebody, they might not, but like I really enjoyed The Mandalorian. I love the idea that a character, a Mandalorian, could basically be an old Western and travel with a little kid. And I think there's a samurai series called Wolf and Cub that was famous a long time ago. And so a story that's fun to follow, that you can connect with, can be connected with by people of many different generations. But there are some characters, like when they did the Ben Kenobi series, I didn't connect with that one as well. I felt like a lot of things were preloaded and predetermined, and it didn't match my internal expectation of what I thought it should be. There were too many expectations that come to that, and I think it sort of worked against it. Stephen King was once interviewed on an article a long time ago. I think it was in Time magazine. No, it was in Newsweek, and he was asked what makes his book so scary, but his film's not that scary? How come there is a disconnect sometimes with his material? And he said that when he writes a book, it's viewed in what he calls skull theater. Inside the mind of a person, they project into it their strongest emotions. So when he wrote Cujo, if somebody's scared of a wolf, if they're scared of a Rottweiler, if they're scared of a black dog or whatever it is, they're putting that into what they're reading. But the moment you have to pick a dog and put it on screen, he picked Saint Bernard, and he felt that a trustworthy, lovable pet that turned into a monster was scary, but visually it didn't translate to most people. Most people weren't really that affected by that Cujo. It just looked like a slobbering, angry dog, and it lost its intensity. So some mediums don't translate well when you switch over to them, and so being able to understand how to connect with people is more important, I think, than being technically accurate to what you wrote. And so if we started it over, I think I would want to create a brand that would have things to connect that are nostalgic, that start to answer questions about what's going on now that would have made sense to ask, sort of like how the Mandalorian show, that's not Boba Fett, but it is a Mandalorian, and it's an extension of that experience and connectedness, and yet it's fresh content and it's relatable versus trying to make a Ben Kenobi interpretation where everything's preloaded and it's going to be a certain way. And to me, that series just didn't do as well. I didn't relate to it as well. I was disappointed with it. And so even though they had high-profile actors and well-known people, everything, they may have even had a bigger budget. So I think it's important to be relatable, to be accessible, and to think of how to create bridges between the past and the present, and not just to be landlocked into the past. And so I think the Chaotic 2.0 should look a little different than the old Chaotic. What have we learned since then till now, and how can we still relate to the core concepts of the brand? And I personally think, with my experience on it and with my love of design and all the experiences I've had in between, that I could make stuff that's even more relatable than before. So that's just my opinion, but yeah, these are some of my thoughts on how I would relate to people, you know.
Yeah, well, I think that's great, and I think you gave a great answer and a great comparison with The Mandalorian, just as a show that you know, you don't need to know everything or have seen everything Star Wars to still watch that show and appreciate it for what it is. And I think it does a great job of appealing to the hardcore fans that still want to expand their knowledge of the world, but also someone like my wife knows nothing about Star Wars, and she watched that show and she enjoyed it thoroughly, knowing next to nothing, jumping right into it. So I think that's a great comparison, because Chaotic, I think, ideally would do something similar where it can appeal to us hardcore fans that want to continue to learn more about the world, but also be a nice fresh start for someone who's brand new to it. If it relaunches.
Well, there are themes in Chaotic that are still perfectly relevant. There's each of these factions think that they're right, but there is no right faction. You can be a Mepidian, you can play as a Danian, like whatever you connect with, it's right for you, but it's neither right nor wrong. And so the idea of being able to see, like, we live in a world now that is more connected than ever before, and through social media, through the internet, a lot of boundaries are being broken between cultures, where people can assimilate new things, new ways of looking at things, and have more empathy and understanding for diversity. And so with a more diverse world and ability to communicate, that makes perfect sense for Chaotic. To me, you have these different factions that represent different ways of thinking, and being able to explore storylines of relatability and cultural differences. And there are many other things like that you can do that I think would just fit in pretty easily as far as continuing to develop stuff. So yeah, I think it'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Kind of getting close to the end here. Wanted to just do a little fan service. Some of the viewers had some questions for you, so obviously feel free to expand upon these as much as you want, but if you want to give a shorter answer for these, that's totally okay too. But yeah, speaking of Brian Gannon, he had a question for you. He asked, "How are you doing? And what is your favorite card?"
Well, I'm doing great. Since he last saw me, I've been up and down and all over the place. I've worked at different studios. I've seen some studios close, some studios start, and I'm in a good place. I'm making art. I'm still doing the things that I love, and I'm healthy and have no complaints. So yeah, I think Chaotic played a big role in setting my trajectory, even to this day, on where I'm at. As far as wait, what was the other question?
What is your favorite card?
My favorite card. Yeah, that's why I was having trouble thinking. I think I have two favorites. One of my favorite cards is a collab. Kari Randolph worked on a Maxor card, and then he handed it to me, and he wanted my help to complete it. And so the card looked great. It was a cool design, but I took it and I painted over it, and I amplified the emotion and feeling of Maxor's face. I changed the eyeball color. I made his hair longer. I made his head bigger. I made little changes structurally and to the contrast. And by the time it was done, I think it turned out to be one of the best cards that we had in many of the series of cards. So I'd say that one, that collaborative card, and then my personal favorite never saw the light of day. It was a Van Vloot card where I had him wearing plate mail and his wings against a red background. And that one evolved into a card, I think, called Armor of Earth. And I don't think that card was ever printed, but I can share some art with you and show you what it was going to become. But I'd say the top one was collaborative. And it's interesting because Chaotic is about teamwork, collaboration, and working with people. So that was a fun card to work on. As far as personal, individual, single cards, I'm not sure. I think I'd leave it at those two.
Cool. Nice. Yeah, those are really great cards. Next question. What are your favorite artists / inspirations?
Favorite artists, I think, are something that we go through different experiences, things that we're trying to visually understand, and we look at people who understand them better. And as we gain that understanding, we start to find other things we don't understand. So I always have like a rotating list of artists that I'm looking at or that I'm learning from. And then there are a few who have really impacted the core structure of who I was as a kid and shaped my thinking. There are these old Dungeons and Dragons books. There was a couple of artists that were in there, and those artists were influential on me. Let me see. There's this guy, I think his name is Jeff D. He was one of the artists in the Deities and Demigods. He was a game designer. He used to work for TSR. And then there was another guy who would sign his name Russ, Russ. And his art style is totally different than my style. But I used to just love watching his designs. Like whenever he would release a character in a book, like in the Fiend Folio, he had a lot of his work there. Those early Dungeons and Dragons artists were like a huge part of shaping the way I interpreted lines and characters, and that was my gateway into fantasy art. Along the way, I really love Art Nouveau and organic design. I lean more towards organic things than mechanical in my art tendency. So Alphonse Mucha is considered a legendary and godfather of Art Nouveau as an art style and movement, even though there were many people that played a role in that. So he's a big influence on me. And for a long time in my early 20s, Adam Hughes was a comic artist who drew for DC often and did a lot of female characters. And I just really liked the way he handled lines and shapes. And I've gotten away from his style, but he had a big impact on me while I was really trying to develop my art style. So these are some of the artists that influenced me. But I'd say a good part of my inspiration early formative years came from the Dungeons and Dragons artists, even ones that weren't so great. There's some that are amazing, but they just don't draw like me at all. There's another person named Errol Otis, I think was his name. And yeah, these were the people that laid the foundation for my way of thinking. So they're not, for the most of them, they're not classical artists. They're not famous in old world art, but they're famous to me. And I feel that whoever affects you is who affects you. And that is what makes you different than other people. I don't have to know every master or famous artist that's ever lived to know that people inspire me. So these are the people that inspired me, gaming artists.
Awesome. No, that's really cool to hear. Next question. I don't know if you remember the Music cards. They were kind of like the spell cards within Chaotic. Someone was curious. They asked, was there any specific method to creating music artwork, or was it purely abstract?
Those were right before I joined. I know what you're talking about, but I didn't play a role in the design of those. When I joined, there were some that I think I was supposed to work on, and my approach would have been to create more diversity. It looked like those were very heavily formulated, like they had a very specific way of doing them, it seemed, for many of them. But if I had been assigned a bunch of them, I think I would have made them a lot more organic and diverse and created more contrast. But that was before my time. It was right before I got there. I didn't design any of those, so I don't know.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. And I know we've talked about it a good bit off the record, but
and I need to say,
yeah,
if music cards were made after I started there, I wasn't part of the discussion. So they would have been handled by someone else or by Jason Narve as the art director in New York. So it could be that they were releasing them, but I didn't play a part.
gotcha. Yeah, that's kind of what I figured, because they were in those sets, but I assumed that's what you were saying. They weren't under your direction.
Yeah, there was so much to do that they had me focus on putting out a few big fires, and in the process, I think some things got offloaded that weren't as critical. That may have been one of them.
Gotcha. Cool. Again, I know we talked about this a good bit off the record as far as unreleased artworks. I don't know if you wanted to talk about any unreleased artworks that you'd like to share now, or we could just do it in separate content like we discussed. But yeah, just curious if you want to talk about any of that.
Well, I have a lot of artwork that was completed for cards, but that hadn't been printed. And many of those cards, I have the progression of how those cards were made. I don't have stats for those cards, so I wish in a perfect world we could give the fans a new card that was able to be added to their deck and just have something fun. Those stats could exist. There are other people that I worked with that may have already figured it out. So on that stuff, that's kind of a question mark for me to follow up and see if I can get more clarity. But as far as sharing stuff, I'm happy to share artwork, but I feel like there's so much stuff to be shared that it might be helpful for us to break it into smaller chunks. And so maybe doing smaller pieces of things, like to take a focused look at the Danians and what made the Danians special, and what artwork do we have relevant to them, and or showing a few trading card art that was right before Chaotic was canceled, that was going to be hitting the print but didn't. There's just too much stuff to go over, and I figure we should get a focus and pick a few things and just gradually share stuff with the fans to keep it fun and to keep a steady stream of ideas coming out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look forward to that. I think the fans do too. It'd be really cool to see more unreleased artwork.
And
Cool.
some of the best parts of the unreleased artwork isn't the artwork being finalized, but was just the sketches and the notes and the behind the scenes thinking. So I think being able to see why we made something the way it is also really insightful and fun. It doesn't always have to be about the final product, but what the struggle was behind the scenes and why a character looks the way it does. You know, that I think for me personally, I like knowing like, oh, you mean the original Ralph McQuarrie Darth Vader picture looked a little different and Stormtroopers didn't quite look the same. These were the early prototypes and this almost became Star Wars, but it's not. Like those types of things are kind of fun to learn about as well. And I have plenty of those to share.
Absolutely, yeah. Even just some of those sketches that you've shown me have been some of the coolest pieces. So definitely look forward to that. Um, cool. So someone asked, what should aspiring card artists focus on if they want to follow a similar career path? Or maybe a better way of asking is, for aspiring artists, what advice can you give them?
Well, with making trading card games and collectible cards, there's a few different ways that you can go. Even as an artist, some artists seem to naturally gravitate towards typography and design in a graphic layout kind of way. So they're showing borders, colors, easy to digest ways to look at information. Like how do you get the information of a card into a person's mind? There is an artist that I personally love that helps that type of thinking. And although he does not make trading cards, I think he's brilliant and has a lot to teach anybody in the graphic art space or in just absorbing information. His name is Edward Tufte, Tufte. I think he teaches out of San Diego State. I buy his books when they come out, and he just takes ordinary information that you see and shows you easier ways to present that information and has discussions about it, like a bus schedule or a map or a graph, like things that everybody sees every day and doesn't really think of it as art. And he shows you that there is an art to presenting information. So there's that technical, mechanical, graphic arts side of trading cards, and he's a great start. It is advanced and technical reading sometimes, but I think it's still digestible. I think especially for younger kids and for artists who just really love just drawing characters and weapons and vehicles and stuff, identifying your natural tendencies. Some people really gravitate towards organic things, some gravitate towards mechanical things. And if you find yourself naturally leaning into one or the other, take an area of something that you want to learn about and focus on that for a while. And literally just like, let's say you're into vehicles, take a period of time and draw as many vehicles as you can in your sketchbook of that period of time, like World War II era tanks. What did American tanks look like? What did German tanks look like? What did Russian tanks like? As you go through different interpretations of a vehicle, you build a mental library in your head. And the bigger your mental library is, the faster you can draw when you don't have references or help. And so some of the fastest designers I know have simply practiced drawing a wide range of things. It's sort of like having a big pantry. You can cook more things when you have a bigger pantry, and your resource, your storehouse of information spawns out of that library. So practice copying, practice learning, reading about it, digesting it. You can draw it in your own style. You can even just loose little doodles. The more you absorb that, the better that is. And you can do the same thing for organic things. If you go down an organic route, taking time to learn human anatomy and then also learning comparative anatomy. How do the muscles look a little different on a chimpanzee than a gorilla, than a man? And those little nuanced differences really help you understand like how you want to draw your forms and what feelings you want to convey. One of the hardest things that I had to ever do in school was also pretty simple. My teacher, there was a teacher named Victor Casados that used to teach at Orange Coast College, and I took a class from him. And he gave me on my final exam like multiple parts to do. But one of the assignments was I had to do a self-portrait of me as myself, of me as the opposite gender, and of me as a neutral gender. And so since I was masculine, I drew feminine, and then I drew neutral. And so everybody had to draw 3 different types. And the point of that was that the self-portrait needed to be very accurate. And if you had a sister or a twin, you could cheat and it'd be easy. But at the time, I didn't have anybody to quickly cheat with. So I had to really think about the effects of hormones on affecting the shape of the body and how much have been in your system and how many years. And so I think I was 18 or 19 when I drew that picture. But it taught me so much. So those types of lessons really get you challenged and looking at the details and growing. But when everything's said and done, I encourage artists to first just think, what makes you happy? What is fun to do? And what's fun to do is generally sustainable. And if you have a little sketchbook and you just like making patterns, that's okay. You don't have to draw characters. Draw what gives you joy, what helps you have fun. And then as you do that, can you build community? Can you do this with other people? And that community has a way of helping you maintain momentum. And then as you do that, can you go further in that area and find out who's the best at doing that thing? And look at what they're doing. If you copy something intentionally as a study, as a way to learn, as a way to even show respect to somebody, to say, hey, I want to learn like this person, that's totally permissible. It's just not permissible to take credit for someone else's work. So these are just some tips I'd give a younger artist, but I think there's a lot of things you can do, and it's so much easier to connect with people through watching videos or following their account. If you can find an artist you like, it's usually there's an account out there you can follow, and usually they're sharing something about their process. So even a lot of the famous anime artists often have little tutorials and things that they share on YouTube and stuff. So I'd say start with what you love, get involved with friends. Even one other person counts as your community, and expand from there and search out the things that make you happy and inspire you.
That's awesome. That's really great advice. Appreciate that. Last question for you. Where can people find your more recent work?
I'm overdue to update it. Most recent work is kind of old. Artstation.com/Stoneworks, and works is spelled WURKS.com. I've posted a lot of my stuff there, but I think in the coming weeks I need to take some of my art that hasn't been posted and make some posts there and share it. And I have some old Chaotic cards, but I think I'll make a Chaotic tab and just add more stuff from Chaotic there. But outside of checking your page, that'll be where I put any stuff. I think somewhere out there, I once made a DeviantArt page. There was some old art that was there, but I think most of that art has been shared on ArtStation. So at some point, I think I needed to either get rid of that account or revive it, but I'll try to migrate everything to ArtStation so that way it's consolidated.
Cool. That sounds good.
But
Well,
we see a couple of cards like the crystal shard that Maxor is holding, and that was my first crystal shard that I made, and that set the tempo for all the focused object cards that came out of Chaotic.
yeah, absolutely. For those that are curious, hopefully I'll be able to share more of Stone's work here on the channel. But for the time being, please go check out that page. He has lots of a handful of Chaotic artworks and some sort of behind the scenes, step-by-step development photos for those. So go check them out. They're really cool to look at. But yeah, I think with that about does it for the questions. Stone, I really appreciate you taking the time. The little we've talked, get a little glimpse into your life. Sounds like you're plenty busy with plenty of other projects. So you taking the time to do this for myself and other Chaotic fans, and obviously the work that you poured into Chaotic all those years ago still has an impact on us. So really appreciate the work you've done and taking the time to share this with us. And yeah, just really appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to sharing some more cool stuff. And so, thank you so much.